We're going to go ahead and get started. If you'd please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Terry, if you do roll call, please.
Pat Rooney.
Here.
Helen Ward.
Here.
John Maston.
Here.
Kathy Cox.
Yes.
Nicole Cohen.
Here. Every day.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I get a motion to review and accept the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Do we have the agenda in front of us?
Yes.
It's on the back.
Flip it over.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Helen Ward.
Yes.
Pat Rooney.
Yes.
John Maston.
Yes.
Kathy Cox.
Yes.
Nicole Cohen.
Yes. I'm going to turn this over to Mrs. Asaya.
Okay. So I did just pass out, this is just a copy and paste of our policies, so I could only waste one piece of paper. The BG is the school board policy process. It talks about policy adoption. And then on the back side are the areas right now that we have policy that addresses the staff fringe benefits. And the reason I put these in is that as we talk about, and the board had indicated that one of the things we wanted to do was develop a policy on the selection of trustees for the Employee Benefit Trust Board, which is the board's purview, so that we do have a defined process. And then the question would be, if we have a policy, where would we put that policy? So those were the two things that I wanted to just have here. I went back and reviewed the original trust document, and the language on the original trust document just barely, basically, it's one paragraph, and it states that the trust shall be administered by at least 5 joint trustees, of whom no more than one may be a member of the governing board and no more than one may be an employee of the school district. The trustees shall be selected by the school district and may resign or be removed at any time. An alternate trustee may be appointed who shall serve in the absence of a regular trustee. In the event of the removal or resignation of a trustee, the school shall designate a successor to such trustee. And so the board has the authority. When we talk about school, we're talking about the governing board to appoint trustees. And so we decided early on that we needed to develop a process for doing so, because it was not a structured process and had been, there was a process that wasn't adopted that was occurring, a practice. There was a practice, but no adopted process for the selection of EBT trustees. So as we talk about that process, and part of the reason that we're having this discussion is we do have 3 members whose term is up at the end of June. And we have not spent time developing a process, so we have a little bit of a time crunch to speak about that. So there's a couple of things that that we would want to consider as we talk about developing a process. And the first would be, if we're going to have a well thought out process and then actually do the process, we probably have not enough time between now and June. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing, is do we want to do something that will address the issue for now and spend more time developing a process? Or do we want to get into developing a process right now? And then the second piece of it, as we do begin to develop a process, we still probably need to have some of that conversation, because we do have a subcommittee meeting coming up May 30th, which will be about revising the trust document. So I know the question will come up about how do trustees for the board become appointed. So we probably need to have a little bit of discussion to have some direction for that. So,
may I ask a question?
Sure.
In reading the trust again, it seems to me that it's very clear that changes to the document, at which I call the bylaws, but, are, once this document was created, that the changes have to be made by the EBT members, not the ones that you mentioned,
Yes,
but changes to this document.
that is correct.
And so, what latitude do we have, say today, to make a lot of changes? Are we very, very limited? And I'm looking at down the road, legal issues.
Right.
If, let's say, the company that holds our reinsurance decides they don't want to pay off on a big debt, and they ask to see the bylaws, and we give them the new bylaws with the new date, and they say, well, no, we want to see, your trust has been in existence for years, we want to see. They go back, and they see that this document says that it's the EBT members.
And that is correct.
Okay.
And so currently the trust document is being reviewed by the EBT board.
Okay.
And part of the reason that we have a subcommittee that's set up is because that board exists at the, I'd say at the pleasure of, I don't mean it to sound that way, but at the pleasure of the governing board.
Right.
And the trust exists as a result of that. And this board has the authority in the document to dissolve the trust because it is a linked structure. So the subcommittee, in creating the trust document, the purpose of that was because of the fact that we need to have input into that because the trust is affected by the governing board and the governing board is affected by the trust. However, the actual approval of this document is up to the trust board. And so that's partly why we need to have the attorneys involved in that, because
Okay.
we need to make sure that whatever is done is legal.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
my question.
Yeah.
All right.
So, and I don't want to project, I don't personally believe that the trust board is looking to make major changes in how this trust is running. It's just a matter of making it more current and relevant in terms of the document itself.
And if I may, I just want to share something. I've looked at a few school districts in Arizona, their trust documents, and so I have with me Tucson Unified, which is huge, and they have a self-funded trust. And they just restated it. They just started it in 2010, but they have already restated their original trust document.
Okay.
So ours hasn't been restated
Okay.
in 30 years. But I just wanted to read you this one part under the power to amend, because it does talk about the power of the EBT. But then it also has a separate paragraph, and it reads, the school district governing board reserves the right to alter, amend, or terminate this trust and the terms under which it exists.
Okay.
So I only read that because it's a 24-page document, newly done, and I'm quite sure that they had lawyers all over
Right.
that.
So we need a statement like that in ours.
And there is, I went through actually last night and read it again carefully, and there is already in here that with the agreement of the trust can be board, it can be disbanded. Without the agreement of that board, it's a 90-day notice. And so this board has that authority, which I don't believe that we're going down that pathway, but I think that it needs to be understood that the trust doesn't exist without this board. And then the other piece of this, and we haven't talked about the trust document itself, but as we talk about membership, as we move forward in a policy, I think that's another area that we want to discuss. The language right now is a governing board member and an employee, and then at least 3 other non-employees or other. I just will express my opinion. I personally believe that the board always needs to have a governing board representative on that trust board, because that trust board needs to understand how the board is seeing and acting as a district, and they're not here doing that. And then the second thing I do believe is that there needs to be an employee on the board. And the reason is that what the decisions that are made affect the employee, and so somebody needs to voice the employee's perspective on that, whether they're not a majority, but they need to understand that perspective. The remaining members, the past pattern has been that they've tried to appoint members who have had some sort of expertise that would contribute to the Employee Benefit Trust. And so one of the things that might be a consideration as you move forward is that, and thinking about a process on how would you solicit applications, if that's the process, or however it would be, is do you want to have certain qualifications, encourage members who have expertise, either financial or insurance or governance or legal or medical, whatever those might be, and then actually have a rubric for kind of like our RFP process. You get X number of points if you have this amount of expertise or this experience or something. So I think there's a lot to consider in going forward, and I'm not sure that's something that we can do in a timely manner.
Well, I don't think we can either. I see really two issues. The first is we don't have an appointment process for anything that we would do with the outside world. I think that if we're going to have the committees as an example, there needs to be an appointment process for that as well. And I think what we can do here is we can develop an overarching appointment process within our policies. And I don't think that it needs to be substantially different, whether we're talking about the EBT or committee or anything else that the governing board would take on. I've seen the city do this with their committees as an example. And it doesn't matter if you're going to be on the Trails Committee or the Planning and Zoning Committee or pick one, there's a process and it goes to the city clerk's office. And so I think the base process is a pretty easy thing to come up with. Should there be a rubric behind it? Absolutely. We should have some type of a scoring method to know if we're getting the right person to go on that committee. But when I look at the EBT right now, we've got a 5-member panel, and that 5-member panel is 3, 1, and 1 in the stagger. And I think somewhere along the line we had a vacancy and an appointment type of process happen where we didn't fill a position, we put it as a new position. I think we need to, as we start to approach this, take advantage of that and think about how do we fix that stagger. Ideally, I could see it come out as 2, 2, and 1. That would give you that rolling experience that we're desirous of on a body like that. And you would have an appointment process annually under something like that. But I think we should have some type of an overarching way to do this in policy. I would say we don't target it just for the EBT, but we look at that overarching goal.
I have some disagreements with John on this. First of all, I think our biggest problem is figuring out a way to identify the citizens of Lake Havasu that we think are fit to be on that board and that would be willing to put forth their time. That's where our biggest issue is going to come, is identifying the people to be on the board. But as far as the rubric goes, each of us have different evaluation standards, and we should have different evaluation standards. You have talents that I don't have, and I have talents that you don't have. I may very well want to stop somebody strictly because I see something that you're not seeing. And a rubric is an easy way to say, oh, we picked the best person because they had the highest number. And rubrics are abused terribly. We have management personnel here. There's 5 of us who have all been in management positions. And we know that on the average interview process for a job, we've made our selection before they ever walk through the door. Only thing we look for is somebody who shines all of a sudden. And a rubric simply says, okay, I'm not at fault. See, no matter what you pick, you can't blame me because the rubric said this was a good person. I'm just putting that out there for everybody to think about.
Well, I agree because, I was drawing what I thought would be a good, we don't even have an application process or anything. And so I thought, what is it that I want to know from somebody who would want to be on the board? And I would want to know what their level of interest is, their level of commitment. I don't have any expertise in employee benefit trust, but I'd be willing to sit down with anybody and discuss everything about it because I've studied it so much. So I think that's an important piece, and I don't know how you would score that, saying. I think experience in the medical field is very helpful. But I think that it's important to know that somebody is interested in, because it's a very complicated, it really is complicated.
And I think Denise will tell you, a rubric is great for her position because she's hiring people, and she has to face EEO. And EEO is going to want to know, on what basis did you do that? We aren't hiring someone. We're appointing somebody to a position to oversee, who's a volunteer and has a concern. And that's why I don't think a rubric is a necessary issue in this for us.
I think it's necessary for there to be something, because I don't think that any of the current trustees ever received anything that said, this is what your responsibility is, this is what we need you to do. And I think that's important to have that, and to have just a one-page application so that they know what they would be signing up for, that it wasn't just, you know, a social board.
Right. In the notes that I made, and rubric may be the wrong term to use in terms of a rating, but I do think there needs to be some criteria that you use to consider candidates.
And I think we do that. I mean, you know, I've sat in on hiring things and all that, and people come in, yeah, I don't have a problem with the qualifications and all that, that's good. But at the same time, oftentimes, once you get people in and you start interviewing them, that's where your decision is made, not just on their application process or rubric or anything like that. That just tells you a little bit about them, and then you start personally interviewing them, and then you make your decision. And I'll tell you what, I've never, when people have applied, I've never made my decision prior than the personal interview. I just don't think, I'm looking for the best, and that's the way you get it. They have to supply the necessary information that you want, and then you interview them, and then hopefully you make the best decision.
Nicole,
Yes.
back in June of last year, I believe it was, when I was approached, there was I think it was like a 2-page list of different things that I filled out, and I know at that time there were 3 candidates, and I was at the school board meeting when they announced that I was selected, and it surprised me. I thought someone else was going to be selected, and then the first DBT meeting I attended, I don't know if it was supposed to be in the package or not, but it had all 3 sheets for all 3 candidates and the scoring process. And looking through it, I had the highest score, and I saw that. So I think that maybe that's not the standard, but that's a good start.
I'd love to see that paperwork.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
I've never seen that. Maybe.
And I think Carrie Thompson may have that. I try not to keep a lot of information. I shred a lot of stuff because it's just
Too much.
voluminous. I'll certainly look through my notes if I haven't, but I think if you reach out to Carrie, she may have that. And then the only other thing I like to mention, I think that if it's a 3-year term, I like John's idea. Most of the boards I've sat on in the past, is there's a certain stagger, and I think that's important. But I think also that there should be a limit to serving. And to me, 2 terms, and absolutely no more than 3. But 2 terms, 6 years. And you know, no offense, Carrie is a wealth of information. She's been with the district for so long, and if she was off the board right now, it would create a big hole to me if she was still around to help us out as a consultant. But what happens if Carrie and Carl transfer out of state? So, and no offense to Cinda Ross, no offense to Joe Navarrete on the board here, and sometimes in the past, their longevity is because no one else wants to do it.
That's right.
And that's a shame. But in our last couple of school board elections, we've had more candidates and positions, which I think is great. And I think maybe we're moving in that direction. And I'd really like to get, no offense to anybody's age here, but I'd like to see some younger people becoming involved in these things. And that's a whole societal thing that there's, I firmly believe that not one but two generations behind me, there's a disconnect there, and it's very disconcerting to me that, I mean, everybody's sitting here, here's our volunteers right here, and, you know, God bless you for doing that, but, and it's not just this, it's Kiwanis, it's Rotary, it's, you know, all these things, just trying to get younger people engaged, and it's really, it's concerning to me, but anyways, as far as...
I agree with you on term limits. I really do, but that's something I think that we need to start talking about within the actual document itself.
Sure.
And the reason why I like the term limits in this case is it's not an elected position, it's an appointed one.
Right.
And for anybody who gets elected to office, your term limit comes at a ballot box, in my humble opinion. When you start talking about an appointed position, having that continual rollover in an appointed position, and you and I went through this at the Humane Society together.
Sure.
You do need a point in time where that term starts and stops, and you've got to make the opportunity for other people who might be interested in serving to serve. What we might want to look at with that is the time period away after that second term is up, in my humble opinion, Hal, and you know, if it's a year, if it's 2 years, and if the interest is still there or the opening is there and we can't fill it, we can bring somebody back at that point for another set. But I agree with that.
Yeah.
I would like to respond to both of you. I've always believed in term limits, but in thinking about this, there's another thing to think about that might be more important, which is the knowledge base of the members. And it seems to me it's very difficult to find people who come on board. Sure, some have insurance background, that's great, and you know, financial background. I mean, we don't really have anyone with medical background, and they come to the EBT, and it's like just beginning all over again. And keeping that knowledge there, having someone there who has that knowledge and that history and that kind of thing, is just very, 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 very valuable. So I'd like you to weigh that. Both are important, but which one may be more important for us? And then the second thing I would like to bring up is Carrie's position, because I may be misinformed, but I believe that's an elected position.
Well, that's the process that has been done, but it's not defined anywhere.
No, I know that, but what has been said so far is that the employees have been able to elect who they want for that particular position. And so that's something else that I don't want to just lightly say, oh, let's have term limits for everybody, and then every 2 or 4 years, the staff representative or the teacher, certified person, has to go off, because I would imagine it would take about 4 years just to really, really, really get all of this figured out, and then off they go. So I would be concerned about that, and also that the teachers get who they want on the board.
I'd like to just chime in a little bit. I think that now that the meetings are open to the public, you see staff coming now, so the learning has already begun, people who are interested.
Well, there are representatives from the schools that you see. You don't see many staff members.
Well, I've seen some staff members in here. From last June until the last meeting, I've seen staff members.
Right, but they're the representatives.
No, they're not representatives. Some are from maintenance.
Oh, well, right, I see
So-
that too.
Yeah,
But
so we have people that are not representatives coming to the meetings now. And
But
now
how
that-
would that help make decisions? How would that help the board members make decisions?
Well, what I was going to say was, for years, it's been very intimidating for anybody who is an employee receiving those benefits to even consider running in this school district election, because Carrie and Colleen, they knew what they were doing and nobody else was allowed to attend, so they
Right.
could never catch up to speed.
But as long as you have an election,
But
then-
my point is that there was never an opportunity
Is
to
that,
be at the meetings and to
I
learn what this
understand
is
that.
about. Okay.
But when we, whatever we decide, I'm not, I think that we should let the teacher wants to run again.
Well, I don't think it should just be a teacher, I guess that's my point. It's not just the teacher's trust, it's the staff trust.
Well, I was thinking, I'd heard at one point that you or someone was thinking of widening the board, maybe having more members. So I was thinking if we go down in that direction, which I'm not sure that I would agree with or disagree with, I just don't know. I've thought about both sides. But if we were to go down that, then there would be, I would hope, more representation
but
from the staff.
isn't that representation statutorily limited?
In what way?
I think there's an Arizona law that says that you can only have one governing board person and one school representative and no more.
It is in statute.
It is.
Okay.
On the trust?
Yes.
Yes, for an employee benefit
No, I
trust,
didn't
you
know
can't
that.
have more than one
And-
employee,
how
even if you
often-
have more members.
How often are staff elections held, Mary? Sorry to cut you off, but how often are these staff elections held?
Well, the last time Carrie's
Term ended.
term was ready to expire, we opened it up. People were able to submit resumes, which then were sent to everyone in the district, and we had like a Survey Monkey or something where people voted. And we actually had just Carrie and one other person who applied for the position.
Has that happened at this point? Isn't her
No.
term up?
Her
It
term
is,
is
and
up,
now we
and it
haven't.
hasn't happened.
And part of that was because of the fact that the board had the conversation in January about developing a process.
Right. And also, I wanted one last thing on that. I'm not so sure that we should have a governing board member on the trust. And what I mean by that, because when I read in Tucson's, it made sense to me. They have an ex officio governing member that sits in on all the meetings, but they're a non-voting member.
Yeah, that's-
Because if the trust is truly supposed to be independent, it should be independent, but a board member needs to be there to be able to give their input or, you know.
Then that would be fine, except that now you've got 4 members voting, and there'll be times that's,
Well, if
No
they're ex-
decision will be
If they're
made.
ex officio, you get another person.
Yeah, you
to
get
take
another
their place.
person.
okay, you can explain to me how that works, but I don't want to bog that down us down right now. but-
It would just be like if Joe Navarrete was sitting here right now. We would take her consult because she was a former board member, but she wouldn't vote at the end, but she would engage in the whole process.
But then, you still just have 4 people left.
You
to
have
vote.
5 people.
You would have
Kathy.
5, you would appoint another person to
But-
the trust.
Oh, so we would have 6 members on the trust.
Right, one
Oh, I
would be
didn't-
ex officio,
I-
so
oh,
they
I-
don't
I
vote.
missed that.
That's
step.
okay.
Okay.
I go back to where I started before I offended everybody. Management styles are different for everybody. But I still hold that everything we're talking about, our key issue is going to be identifying the people. And a good start to that action might be to have the EBT members and the people who are dealing with the EBT make a list of the types of skills that the EBT truly needs to function well. So that when we go looking at somebody, we know if they fit into any of those skill sets. If that makes sense. Because that's where the problem's going to be. First of all, how do we know to get people to want to sit on the EBT? There's people out there that could do a great job. Nobody's ever approached them. But if we have a set of skill sets, we know that Joe Schmuckatella over here happens to have some of those skills. Let's go ask him, would you like to be on the EBT? Would you like to volunteer to be on EBT? And get him to apply.
I mean, this is your discussion in terms of going forward, because this is all things we have to iron out. Would we advertise and take applicants? Would you invite applicants? Would you
Yes.
have criteria? They would
Yes.
need to have a description of what the duties would be. And that's totally appropriate. I don't know how new of what they were actually going to be doing. How do they get an understanding? One of the things that's interesting, if I may, one of the things that I talked about in terms of criteria that you couldn't necessarily do when you're hiring staff members, but you could do for a board is, are they credible? Credibility is a huge piece of a board like this because the responsibility is huge when you think about the impact of an employee benefit trust. Are they reliable? Are they committed to it? Do they have a real interest? What is their purpose for wanting to be on the board? Is there another agenda here? Those are all the things that at some point need to be considered as we move forward.
And I think that just by the design of the trust, we somewhat alienated our medical community, and I know that my husband and I have both talked to people within the medical community that would love to sit on this board. And that's the kind of knowledge that you need, because they have nothing to do, with the exception of the emergencies, or specialists, but for the most part, they're not a part of taking care of the school district medically. And, we're always talking about doctors and, trying to get doctors in and having kids, and what better way to be involved than to invite that medical community, to be a sounding board. So all of our information doesn't have to come from just a consultant, that we have some internal free information that we're getting would be nice.
So I have a question. Do we need to, when we do these appointments, do we need to appoint someone to a full term? Could we, within our construct today with the EBT, appoint someone to a shorter term? Could we start to fix the stagger?
We don't have any terms, so we can do whatever we want.
So we can. So what we could do is we could do a couple of 1 year and 2 year renewal and start the stagger back up, and then turn around and really dial the process in.
My personal recommendation would be to do something like that to start with. So either extend everybody by 1 year, or like you say, extend maybe 2 people by 1 year and another person by 2 years, or something like that, and so that you have a stagger in place, and then develop your process, and then whichever positions come up open with the extension of 1 year for the next June, that would be then the place to implement the full process and have time to do so.
Right now, there's 3 members that are coming to term, right? Have they all indicated they won't return?
I have only spoken with Carrie, and who she is interested in returning. And Mr. Christensen is sitting here, so.
Yeah, I'm still interested in, it's a huge learning curve, trust me. I mean, when I first, after the school board meeting, and asked Mary, I said, oh, it's 11:30 tomorrow, how long does these normally last? She said, we usually finish by like 3:30 or 4. I went, what? That was a huge learning curve. But, and I'm still learning, and there's still concepts I'm trying to get around. But I would certainly be willing to go on for another year or 2, but I will tell you right now that I'm 65, and if I went on for another year or 2, then all likely I would probably try to find someone younger than I with the skill set that you're looking for to be on the board. John and I, we've sat on the Humane Society board, and a new person came in and they had a whole different idea that no one ever thought about. It's like, holy smokes! I mean, you need that transition. You need that turnover. It's critical, and trust me, if there were 5 people running for 3 slots and I wasn't selected, you're not going to hurt my feelings. People have tried; they just can't do it. And if someone has a better skill set, that's great. And I think what's going on with the EBT since the year that I've been on it, I think is tremendous, because it's just a lot of, we've just been kind of rolling along our merry way, and now there's things come up and they're being addressed, and I think that's fantastic. And it's, when you've got 500 or 600 people relying on you to make those kind of decisions, yeah, you need a strong board. I think more of the challenge to me is getting the people to get on the board. And no offense to the medical community, if, in my opinion, you want a medical, like office manager or administrative side of medical rather than a doctor. No offense to the doctors, but they're not as valuable to me as someone else within the practice. So they know more of the administrative functions than the.
I'd love an administrator. I learned more in the time that I've spent in medical administrators' offices about how insurance is priced than I've ever learned from a doctor.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I'd be willing to go a year or two again. So.
The reason I asked that about the 3 that are terminating is he just brought up a good point. It might be people are willing to stay with us for a 1-year contract or 2-year rather than 3-year. And I think we need to consider that. If we start looking for replacements, we need to consider the feasibility of keeping somebody for a year or 2 as we make this rotational transition.
Nicole, may I
Yes.
ask, when you spoke to Mark Nixon about serving, have you spoken to him since? Is he willing to
I
serve?
have not.
Okay.
I have not.
Because
But
he's the other one whose term is ready to expire.
His indication to me, and I had a very brief conversation with him as he was walking from an accounting office over to City Hall, just in passing, was he wanted to be short-term but not have his term end. That was the impression I got in our conversation.
I'm sorry, I just blanked out on the 5th member of the board. I have Carrie, Mark, Hal, Marcia, and...
Pat.
Thank you, Pat. It's like you're sitting right here. You couldn't be on that board because you're on this board.
But I agree with Hal, it's a learning curve because of all the stuff that's in there. You come into it, and then you find out these meetings go on forever. And and I also agree with Hal that, I wouldn't be real disappointed if someone else wanted the job after these long meetings. I said, what the hell am I doing on this thing for?
If I may, Pat, when is your term up with the LHUSD?
I think it's a long one.
It's
It
a long
wasn't
one.
one
So
of
is
the
it-
short ones that was
So you went
coming
on in 16, right? So is it 20? Is it 4 years?
I came in as an alternate.
19.
19, a 3-year term? Is that what
Yeah.
you have? 3
Yeah,
years?
it's a
Okay.
3-year term.
I was just looking, we have 3 at 17, 1 at 18, and 1 at 19. So if we...
Now that you mentioned that, it's really sounding long.
Now, the superintendent brought up a good point in the very beginning about how we were going to go about this. Did we want to try to make a policy right now, or did we want to do something in interim? I think common sense tells us right now that we need to address the problem of the people that are leaving and make sure our board is stable. And then we can draw up the multi-page document with all the policies and the ins and outs and the subheadings. But right now, we need to address the board and make it stable. Does that make sense?
I'm not opposed to considering just extending for a year so we can work out the process.
I'd love to fix the staggering process.
So
But,
in,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, if you were to extend everybody by a year, you would have 3 at 18, 1 at 19, and 1 at 20. If you were to extend one of the 3 2 years, so just using Hal as an example, then you would have 2 at 18, 2 at 19, and 1 at 20.
Yeah.
So that would be a possibility if you wanted to consider that.
Well, are you talking about, or you could extend all 3 of us 1 year, then you can have 4 and 18 and 1 and 19, but that gives you your year to do your magic.
It's,
Well, you could also talk to the individuals, because he's already said he's willing to stay at least 2, maybe 3. And
You didn't say 3. Big plus, Al. It's a big plus.
and you may have some people that say, man, I really want out, but I'll hang with you for a year, right? if one person's going to stay too, we've got our rotation begun, right? We're beginning to get our rotation. We still don't want to wind up with a block of 3 people leaving in a year. If we
I
can
agree.
avoid that, we want to avoid it.
Well, it makes it worse because you actually have a block of 4 now.
Yeah,
Right, and that's why I was suggesting if you're going to do an extension, do everybody by 1, and that way you still at least have 2 staggered, but you could do 1 more at 2, and that way change your stagger. That's,
Right.
seems fairly logical, and it seems as though the folks that you have on the board now are functioning well, so.
If you can build it into where there's a built-in laddering effect, I think that would be most beneficial. So that way, like Mike was mentioned, you don't have a mass exodus and then new people coming on. That would be ideal in my mind.
So maybe what we want to do is we want to talk to the 3 individuals involved, verify that they're willing to do the extensions, and what the length of extension would look like for each of them, and put this on the agenda for June.
Well, I think that we go with the 2 one-year extensions, 1 2-year extension, and we already know that Carrie and Hal will serve, and if Mark decides that he doesn't want to serve, well, we'll know that.
I think Mark's got really your idea.
I know he's wrapping up a lot of things too.
Right.
So I don't know what his thought is on that, so.
I know-
Even if he didn't extend a full year, if he would be willing to stay
Sure.
for another 6 months, that would give you time to have a
Right.
process to replace that position.
Exactly.
If the term was for a year.
Right.
So then are you also saying in order to stagger it, adding a year to the other 2, so you have a 19 and a 20? 2 19s, 2 18s, and a 20?
Mhm.
I agree.
I would just think from an experience level, my recommendation would be to look to Carrie for 2, and then Mark and I for 1. Just because Carrie has the most experience on the board at this point. And I don't know what she and Carl's future, what they're looking at, but that would give her a 2-year window. And again, if one of the staff representatives that attends the meetings, I like that idea because then you can vet people out, because the one says, I don't want to go to that meeting, it's a pain in the butt, and the other one says, well, I can't wait till next week to get at the meeting.
Right.
You get the person who's engaged, then there's the person that's going to want to be on board.
Right. My only concern with not making Hal's term the 2-year stagger is that if it's just the 1-year extension, he's going to decline the next 2-year.
And my only thought was that,
Not necessarily, but again, I'm still a proponent of encouraging younger people. I know I keep hammering at home, but encouraging younger people to become involved. There's a lot of wealth of management and skill sets out in the community in the 30, 40, 50 age group, and I think that'd be great to get that person that's, number one, willing to make that commitment, because it is a huge commitment.
Is there any way
So Mike-
legally to extend him under the agreement that he has to re-extend if he can't find his own replacement?
well, actually what I was thinking about, if I may just speak, and I think the Thompsons are with us for a long term because they still have an elementary student.
Sure.
But the only thing is, if that's an elected position, is do we want to assume that our school community is okay with extending their elected person for 2 years, or do we want to give them an opportunity to have an election next year?
I share that concern.
Yeah. That was the only reason I was putting Carrie as a 1-term, was so
Sure.
that we could have an election and we don't have to do it right away. I suspect that she would be reelected, I don't know, but, so that was just my thought.
Well, either way, 1 or 2 for me, that's whatever the board
I just took a volunteer.
wants, so.
I already wrote him down as 19, but you guys have to make that motion, not me.
Thanks, Al.
You're welcome. I hear the trainer running.
You hear the guitar, huh? So are we going to verify and bring this back for a vote?
Well, it has to go on the agenda, I think.
Yeah.
Well, we actually have it as an action today, should you choose to do so.
Oh, okay.
We can take action
We
today.
can take
but
action today.
But I'd like to see us firm those names and numbers up. Bring it forward that way.
That is on the June. Yes, that is on the June. This is just what you want to put
Right.
on the June as the extensions or
Okay.
anything like that, so,
We have that on the June agenda?
yes.
Yes, I already submitted,
Okay.
submitted, before I knew all this was going to happen, I
We
had
have it. Yeah, it's
originally
not
submitted an
finalized.
agenda action line with the 3-year extension, so we'll just adjust it if that's acceptable. So we have
So,
Nexon and Thompson in 18, Christensen and Cox in 19, and Rooney in 20.
no, I thought I was 19.
We just extended you by a year.
What?
We just extended you by a year.
But,
Well, you have the
but
choice.
if you're, yeah, I mean,
Always resign.
By a year?
I know that you were, asked to be on the trust board,
Yeah.
but if
I
you're
just want to let you know it's
uninterested
not-
in that,
No, I'm interested, and that's why I volunteered, but
there's
it's
other
not going to
members.
go on forever.
Well, you're the board representative.
Yeah,
So when your term is up, you're up.
oh, okay. good.
Kind of like what Joe did to you.
Yeah, well, that's fine. I'm just saying, I agree with Hal, I hate to say it, because you get to a certain age, and it's the responsibility of other people to take over. It's not that you don't, you're not interested, because I'm interested, but I just, and I mirror what Hal says, there are other people with other ideas, or maybe better expertise and all that. That's what I'm saying. I never thought I'd get to this age and feel that way, but that's a reality. So I don't want to be one of these people who stays too long on anything, other than on Earth. I want to stay on Earth.
well, I just have to reiterate, I'm just a little bit younger than you.
Yeah.
I am interested, and I've done extensive research for 2 years, almost, on this trust. So if you would like to have a little more time with your family, I would be willing to throw my hat in the ring for that board seat.
Well, yeah, down the line, I could, whatever, but I'd like to continue. I just started, and evidently people have enough confidence in me, and so I'd like to continue, and then we'll see where that goes. But
Well, if you change your mind.
But I'm not going to be here forever, other than on the school board or the EBT. I'd like to be on Earth forever, but so I'm not planning on checking out early, so I want to let you know that. Last thing God needs is another Irishman up there. I'll get there, I guess.
You're just assuming up there.
I think,
That keeps it in perspective. Thanks.
I know we got probably more to cover, but I think before we wrap all this up, I think one thing we should do is we address the immediate problem. We ought to set ourselves a buy date for policy revision. Because if we don't, we're going to go home thinking, gosh, we got a whole lot done today, and we're going to forget we've got a whole lot more to do.
Do we have enough that we've discussed today, do you think, to flesh out an initial policy that we can work out?
We certainly, I could draft something up, yes. I'm curious, Mary, do you by chance have copies of the forms that were used for the?
Yes, I'm sure I do.
Okay, that would be nice to see those, and that way Hal doesn't have to worry about going home and looking through all of his stuff.
And is 30 days enough, 60 days, 1 meeting, 2 meetings, 3 meetings?
For policy?
No,
For an agenda?
to start looking at,
To get it drafted out.
to get it drafted and start the process of marking that up.
July, maybe.
Actually, so we have June, it would be probably, if he would be open to it, August would be the meeting, probably to bring something forward as a
Sure.
draft. Yeah.
Sure.
Now, we will be bouncing that off the EBT also, right? In other words, the EBT board will look at that policy before we start finalizing it.
Not this policy.
No. This is our
The
policy.
trust document, we've agreed to work together on, but this is just a flat board policy.
The thing that worries me about that is if there's something that the EBT board sees in that policy that they think could rub or could cause friction, it would be better for them to tell us before we publish it. Just think about it. It's just a thought.
I don't think we're opposed to input,
No.
but the policy is ours.
Well, I understand that. I understand that. I'm just saying, soliciting input straight from them, who are the people that it's going to possibly affect, is just, I think, a good idea. But
We need a vehicle to be able to do that. I'm so glad Hal showed up today, but what would the vehicle be? Would it be inviting them to another school board meeting, or would it be a combination of board? I mean, how would that happen so that we could get input from all of
When
them?
we get what we consider to be our final draft, maybe what we do is we simply email it out to the EBT board and say, what do you think?
I mean, it doesn't seem like it's going to be that involved. You're just going to come up with
No,
some
it shouldn't.
criteria.
No,
And
it should be
it's-
pretty
yeah, I
straightforward.
think
And actually, we can email out to the EBT board because it's
Right.
not.
yeah, and it
it's
shouldn't
not
be,
hard.
like you said,
It'll
it
be
shouldn't be
okay.
that complicated.
No.
And I don't foresee us having any problem. It's just the fact that we are the overseeing board, and it's just a courtesy, if nothing else, to say, do you folks see any problem with what we're doing here?
It's just, you're cleaning up a 30-year-old document and putting some criteria in there. And like Al said, it's pretty straightforward. So. And I don't have a problem taking a look at it, so.
Well, having gone through the entire document, I highlighted areas other than what you're talking. You brought up today, which were the important ones, but just for clarification, I would like to have some questions answered, but maybe today's not the day to do that.
Well,
What
I'd be
kind of-
happy to sit down with you because I have the whole original one marked up every single page, so I
Okay.
would be happy to
There's a-
receive feedback.
There's a committee right now with board members and EBT members
Right.
doing that right now.
Right,
They're
so we have May
reviewing the whole
30th
document,
is the subcommittee meeting, which is an open meeting.
right?
But I think probably one of two things, Kathy, would be for you to sit down with the two reps the board selected to share the input that you have so they can represent that, or to actually be there as an audience member and
Well, that would be tedious also, too.
so.
You know, for example, I assume, any accumulated funds shall be invested by the trustees. And are the trustees making that investment, or are they giving it to the treasurer in Kingman to make the investment?
No, it's in a Morgan Stanley account.
Yeah.
But who made the decision to put it with Morgan Stanley? Was
The
it
board.
the EBT board did that? Okay. And who advised them that it should be Morgan Stanley rather than another company?
More
Dave
than likely
Stewart.
Dave Stewart.
Okay.
So,
They received several proposals and had representatives from firms
Okay.
come and give a presentation,
All right.
and they voted them.
But it was my understanding that we followed the gentleman from one firm to another.
No. No, we had UBS
Right.
previously, and
But
Christopher
Valley or
didn't have
Valley
anything to do with that.
was at UBS and then moved to Morgan Stanley?
No. No, he's been at Morgan Stanley all along. No, we had a whole, the gentleman we actually had managing the funds at UBS happened to pass away, unfortunately. And so somebody else took over the account, and about that time, and he was very good about coming on a regular basis and reporting in, so the trustees requested that proposals, that Mr. Stewart get requests for proposals, and then they had 2 or 3 firms come in and give presentations.
Okay. Another question, after an audit, all reports shall be delivered to each trustee after each audit. Why could not each school board member get a copy of that report? Is there any reason?
Well, we can, it's a public document.
But it isn't final yet, it's only draft form.
No, I'm talking about the bylaws. Should it be stated in the bylaws that you don't think it should be stated in the bylaws that the school board, since we oversee, it's the school board
In
oversees?
theory, we're supposed to have access to everything if we want to see it, other than information that violates HIPAA.
Well, I mean, it's a lot easier for someone to make all those copies at one time rather than 3 weeks later, school board members, oh, I can understand, I can get a copy. Could you make me one?
We keep printed copies?
Well, I think that the purpose of,
But you can send me, well, I guess, but then just send one by email. I don't care. But I'd like to see it without having to go ask for it.
well, I think part of.
I don't even know that I'm going to know when it's available, so I won't even think to ask for it.
Part of redoing the trust document will definitely include, you know, what we can expect at this point, and that's why it's so important, I think, to restate your trust document every time the laws change, because then incoming new trustees will know what to expect. They will kind of, like Mike has a matrix, not that you made it, but I know the ADE has a matrix, or you know, there's some regulating agencies that has a matrix of what you have to do when. I kind of envision something like that within our trust document, so.
A question I have, it says in here that the school shall make its contribution, I believe it's on the first day of every month. Has that been done? And is it being done, was it done in the past?
Not in the past.
The
I know,
past,
okay.
no, that's
So-
been noticed and is being rectified, if I understand.
So is it
correctly.
being done now?
Well, the contribution is made during each payroll cycle to the EBT,
Okay.
to Morgan Stanley, I should say. It's deposited at each payroll cycle.
But it was not done in the past, but it's being done now.
There's been some, I mean, just looking back, I mean, I can't speak as to whether or not certain documentation was exactly correct or not, but there were some inconsistencies, but there were months where there was one contribution made, and then others where there were 3. I don't know if that's just because that's the way that payroll cycle fell, and then that deposit occurred on the first of the following month.
But right now, whether it's the payroll cycle, but no matter what, by the first of the month, the contribution has been put in there the first of the next month, or the 2 payrolls for the preceding month.
Correct.
So then by the first of the next month, the preceding month's contribution is in there, or is it even more current than that?
It's, right now, we're doing our very best to make sure it happens at every payroll cycle. And from what I can see, looking back to July 1, it's been pretty consistent.
Do we make other contributions outside of the payroll cycle?
Like we did earlier this year with the additional payment because of Prop 123. Yes, we do. And sometimes there's carry forward from the previous year that was earmarked for trying to shore up or strengthen the EBT, that there's an additional deposit made at that point too.
What about the $301 fund, was it 13 or?
Yeah, that's made
Is that a monthly?
3 times a year.
That's 3 times a year.
As 301 is dispersed, then there's an EBT payment that goes with that. That happens in October, March, and then again in July. And I did mention, I showed a spreadsheet to a few of you just on what we're working on to try to clarify that, and it does show those actual pay, those deposits made and what time they were made, as far as day of the month.
Who chooses our bonding agent?
It's been Dave Stewart in the past.
Is that customary?
I don't know the answer.
And
to
what
that.
about the company that does our reinsurance?
That was done through an RFP process.
That was, okay.
The consultant, their primary role is to facilitate these discussions and to actually go out and do the legwork in procuring these other services based on going out and soliciting a bid through an RFP process or whatever it is, and then they bring that information back to the board for them to either hear a presentation or just do a straight yes or no vote on that particular proposal. But the consultant's primary responsibility is to go out and do the legwork of procuring or at least gathering solicitations for these different services.
Okay. And then this is very minor, but I'll just bring it up. It just bothered me that the location of this, of the trust is at the city of Lake Havasu.
We fixed
County.
that.
Oh, what did you change it
At
to?
the last meeting, we made it this
District office.
district
Oh,
office.
good.
The address, 22.
Good, I'm glad.
Custodian of record is
Good,
important.
good eye, good eye.
Which I missed because I didn't change the date, because I knew it had changed, but I didn't put it on my calendar. And I was so mad I wasn't at that meeting.
Everybody just assumed you were out of town, so.
Oh, no, most likely I didn't put.
It actually came up, where's Kathy?
It did.
Really?
It did.
And somebody said she must be out of town.
She must
She's
be-
not here.
she must
No,
be out of
because
town.
next time say she probably didn't change the date on her calendar, just say that.
So I'm hearing a consensus from the board that on the June agenda will be an item to extend these terms as discussed.
Yep.
Would you like to make a motion?
So moved.
Seconded. And then how much, what's our timeline then to finalize all the other, how much time do we have?
Well, August, we're going to bring.
In August, I'll bring forward a draft policy. The trust document, as I said, is going to start that conversation in May.
Next week,
Yeah,
May,
Tuesday.
next Tuesday.
Tuesday, really? Okay. I hope you all are ready.
I am. I brought a pencil.
I was thinking it was 2 weeks, but that's all right. I'm glad you said that.
Alan Ward,
Yes.
Pat Murray,
Yes.
Tom Baskin,
Yes.
Becky Cox,
Yes.
Nicole Cohen.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
We also added another item on the agenda for this month.
Discussion regarding procurement.
Yes. Mr. Murray has requested that we have an opportunity, since we were meeting anyway, and we can't have any individual conversations.
I'd like to highlight the word discussion. That's the objective for that agenda item, just so I can, in our office, can kind of just understand where we need to go from here as we enter the season of expending bond funds. Procurement's going to be a major part of what we do for the next several years, and how we go about doing that is extremely important. We all know that there's procurement law, there's some regulation as to how to go about doing it. There's just, I'd like to receive some direction from the board as to your overall views on certain processes. I know that yours and mine, our view is to provide as much local, basically as much local responses as possible to these solicitations. There are many qualified vendors out there in this community. I completely agree with that. I would like to know, as we move forward on some of the more complex projects, as to your view and direction as to how we should go about trying to procure certain individuals. And I'll give you an example. Recently, well, over the last couple months, we embarked on the process of trying to gather qualifications for architectural services. We know that that's going to be a need in the very near future for our high school, our middle school, the athletic fields in general. Also, there's going to be a need as we get into certain structures when it comes to roofing projects, and also the SFB is requiring that any air conditioning replacements now have an engineering spec to it. So there's going to be a need to procure qualified firms to be able to help us with all of these architectural needs and draftings and drawings that are going to be needed for some of these projects. So being pro-local and knowing that you're the same, I think we could pretty much agree that if we can give local people an opportunity to bid and to throw their hat in the ring, that's exactly the ideal situation. So in knowing that, our office sent out an RFQ in establishing qualifications or gathering qualifications for architectural services so we can start the ball rolling. The reason why we did that, rather than going to a cooperative group like a Mojave or a 1GPA directly, because they've already done that work for us, we wanted to utilize our bidders list and also give opportunity for local firms to be able to respond to that qualification solicitation. We established just basic parameters as to some basic scope of work as to some of these projects that were coming in the near future, so they knew what was ahead of them. So we sent out solicitations, I think, to 15, I believe, somewhere along that line, based off of our bidders list. We had 4 responses, and this is actually going to be an agenda item in June, so I'm not going to go into
You're still talking about architects, right?
Architects, correct.
And there are 15 architects.
Well, 15 that we sent out. No, there's only a few in town, 15 on our bidders list.
Oh, I'm on the bidders list.
Out of the 15 that were or so that were sent out, we had 4 responses, none of which were local. So we use that RFQ process as kind of a built-in interview platform to kind of see exactly who is out there, who would like to respond, who's qualified, and then at that point we make the determination as to where we go from here and actually establishing or setting up a contract. So all of that work, even though, again, we're trying to bring in local firms or to engage the community, we did all of that and basically duplicated the process of what a cooperative board did. So my concern is if the expectation is to do that the entire time, there's a lot of man hours involved in these bigger projects. Now, when it comes to subcontractors and going out for local products such as air conditioning units and those types of things, electric, we do that already. We have a bidders list that we go off of through maintenance, and we send out, and we're getting better and more consistent at that to open it up to even more individuals within our community. Because the requirement is to only get 3 written responses, and in some cases even oral, but our policy is to get everything in writing. And we go out to the community for those services here in Lake Havasu City. So my question is...
Can you explain what you said the cooperative was only, what is that?
The state contracts.
The cooperative contracts. So if you have like a Mojave, for example, or a 1GPA, they already do what basically what we just did or duplicated in that RFQ process. So they send out a solicitation to bid to their vast vendors list. I mean, their vendors list is much more in depth than ours would be locally. So not only do locals have an opportunity to be on their vendors list, but people throughout the state do as well. So they send out when there is a need to procure with their organization, like say they have, their contracts are usually 5 years in length. As that 5-year expiration comes up, they will send out another solicitation for vendors to respond for whatever services they're trying to procure, whether it's buses, whether it's office supplies, copy machines, computers, whatever it is. They do all of that work. They send it out. They send the solicitation out. They gather all of the solicitations back, they evaluate them, they determine whether the firm is responsive and responsible, meaning they submitted all of the information that was requested in the RFP. They have the criteria, all the criteria is met in regards to certifications. They've been proven in that field or area of expertise to be responsible in that area. They've demonstrated that they are who they say they are. And that whole process is done through a cooperative agency such as a Mojave or one GPA. And then those contracts are then available for districts and agencies throughout the state to actually use and piggyback onto. So for example, like a Mesa, where they may spend $200,000, I'm just throwing an easy number out there, in certain office supplies. Well, we may only purchase $5,000 in that particular commodity. The advantage of being on a contract such as that is the vendors who have responded to that solicitation are typically sharpening their pencil to the most extreme sharpest point, because they know that they have the opportunity to have all different agencies buying from them, jumping on that contract and actually purchasing through them. So it gives smaller districts more of an advantage in buying power because we're jumping on a contract that these larger districts and other state agencies are utilizing and buying a ton of product from them, whereas we still reap the benefits of that good pricing, that competitive pricing.
It's a double-edged sword. The problem that you run into, and you and I went to the contractors meeting with Cribbin together.
Correct.
And you met Wayne. The double-edged sword is this. Are there things that we probably should be pushing out to the contract rules? Yes, absolutely. There are expertises that may or may not exist in Lake Havasu that they can bring to the table. Architectural firms may be one of those spots. Active Directory integration issues, which is one of the things I've been talking about with IT over email for a couple of days, back and forth. There are absolutely things that you just simply cannot contract in Lake Havasu. That said, the downside of that is you're not involving your community who's writing the check in the ability to go out to bid on certain projects. And I think what needs to happen is you have to have a thought process that says not everything's going to the community, but what can we give to the community? What services can we get our community into bidding on? And what we haven't done, and I think we've been very lax in this, we haven't done is we haven't been proactively pursuing local vendors. We haven't stood somebody up and said, this is the process, this is how you come in, this is how you do it, this is the paperwork that's involved, and here's a sample of what a bid looks like. Because a lot of these guys are small businesses and they've never bid a government job before. There are those that have, but you're going to run into people who are just absolute rookies. I think we've got a good talent pool. I think our talent pool can be dollar competitive, especially on the service end of things. The problem is we've never developed it. We've never looked at it as I can get something here in town. City of Lake Havasu, they have a local company that does all of their fiber optic work. Local. They didn't go to the bid pool for it, which they could have. They went locally and hired locally and got a state-level competitive bid out of Lake Havasu to do their work. So it's possible to do these things. It's just we haven't done them. Does that mean that we're going to go out and find a competitive bid, and I'm just going to pick on my company? Would I competitively bid 3,000 computers against, say, Dell for a school district? Probably not. That's just not realistic. It's not what we're geared to do. But if you asked me if I could convert your Novell logins to Active Directory logins into a best practice analysis on your network and servers and solve some of your drive space issues, probably could, and do it in short order, and competitively bid it against a national company. So I think there's a fine line there that you don't want to alienate your community in the process of getting some of these projects done.
So besides tech, what other industry that operates in Havasu besides tech? And we're already doing it for maintenance
Exactly.
items. So what else would there be?
It also depends on how you define a project, because one of the go-arounds that I had with tech in the conversation was, is it one project? Is it two projects? Is it three projects? They want to roll up the Active Directory conversion and the server install into one batch, yet they don't understand where some of those dividing points might be to make two projects out of it. The other thing is I asked them, I said, is it possible to carve a section of that server project out and make that something that can be at least advertised locally? I think that we define projects as the project, the entire field, including the bleachers and the lights and the press box and the snack bar and everything, or is grading a part of that project that we could potentially get the grading done before the company comes in to lay the turf? Is there something that we can have cooperatively bid?
Well, there will be a process, and that's a great example. I mean, there'll be a process in which you have your architectural firm who's going to actually, scope out and lay out all of the drainage issues and what should be where and how things should be laid out.
Right.
But then what you're referring to is also that level of subcontractors who would then come in and do a specific part of that particular job, like the grading or the turf or the electrical for the lighting. All of those things are, even though it's one project, they're
Right.
separate jobs and responsibilities and completely different vendors who would work there. So I want you to know, and I think you all know that I am pro local. If we can do that, I want them to. There's many people here that I've known over the years and have seen their work. There's very qualified and capable people here. It's just getting it to where, as we have major projects, there's an umbrella. And how do we need to establish that pole that holds the umbrella
Right.
up. And then everything that happens underneath that umbrella we should be giving local people the opportunity to be a part of that.
And then if we go that route, how do we put that together to make that happen in the RFP process?
Yeah.
Well, when you secure, like for example, when I come to you in June and propose the architectural professional services route, that gets the ball rolling. And during the procurement process, we could actually procure multiple firms, which I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself here, or I'm able to. You'll see that there are some options there.
Okay.
I'm not backing or choosing one firm and that's it. We're keeping ourselves open to multiple awards and options so that we have the greatest, it's to the district's advantage, so that we're not waiting on one selected firm who's trying, we're being flexible here and giving more people an opportunity to be a part of this process.
You're going to find,
I think Alan has
Oh, I
had
do.
his hand up for a while. It's
You're
okay.
blending in there with your
Mike,
dark shirt.
I want us to be careful that we don't get wrapped up in the weeds. You asked us for guidance. The best guidance I could give you, if it was me personally, is we put you in that position to make those decisions. But you have to understand that if we get a complaint from somebody, you're going to have to answer the question.
Correct.
But we can't direct you on how to do contracting. That's in your ballpark. You understand what I'm saying?
No, I agree.
Because you may have to hire a cooperative, and they may be picking a local vendor. When we look at it, we see a cooperative, and we say, well, aren't you looking at local vendors? No, you're not. They are. So the best advice I could give as a board member myself is go get them. We'll ask you and we'll hold your feet to the fire if something isn't right. But it's not our job to day say, okay, you need to be getting vendors from here, you need to be getting vendors from there, because we're not involved in those negotiations.
Yeah, and it needs to be understood too that because you hire someone out of a cooperative or you utilize that particular contract, there's still sit-down meetings that occur with whoever is selected and talking about the scope of work and all of the expectations and our own personal beliefs as to, you know, who we should have as far as them going out and looking and hiring subcontractors. We can lean heavily on them to make sure that they're looking at the talent pool that we already have here in this community and they're drawing upon that.
But there again, you know that we prefer local vendors if we can get them. But when you're sitting down at that table with them, you've got all the facts, all the figures, all the numbers, and you're going to have to decide, is it right for me to put pressure on them? Am I in a position to do that? Because if you're not, you have to go with what they say, and we're not in a position here to tell you that you can't make that decision.
Well, certainly, you're going to be approving those vendors.
That's
So,
right.
I mean, we bring them to the board. If you have a bias and we're bringing something that is not going to be approved, that's not in anybody's best interest.
The
I
conversation
think-
should happen. I don't disagree with you.
Right, but I think one of the issues also, and maybe I'm not representing it, but I know that we have in the past, before either Mike or I were here, done overarching contracts where we've specified you must use X% of local vendors. If those vendors are even available, some of them are not. But some of it has also been just the sense of direction. So I don't know, I can't speak to the fact that anybody has said this to us, per se, but the idea that we have to be doing an RFP for every little thing as opposed to going to the cooperative. And there's a lot of time, staff time, I mean, there's truly money wasted doing that process. And so I think that's part of the clarifying is are there guidelines in your minds about that? Are you expecting that every single thing we go out there, we do a full-blown process for? Or is there an expectation that we're going to use some discretion in that and try to do what's best for the overall fund?
I think the discretion has always existed. Again, though, the concern is when you go out and you start really talking to the community, and you've seen this, Mike, the perception of the community is we're not included in the process, or something's missing in what's going on. And so from my perspective, it's always nice to be asked. It's always nice to have somebody say, would you like to be included? And I think that if we're doing that, and if we're making the right offers, if we're making the right thought processes in what we're doing, and we can show that to our community that we, not only do we want to be good stewards, but we also want to be inclusive in what we're doing. Doesn't mean you have to do it with every project, but if we can selectively do some of those things, I think that's a good thing. I think the other thing that's going to help the process is there's a lot more discussion in a board meeting now than there has been in the past on a lot of these things. And I think as we go through that, it would be my hope that the newspaper and the media would be picking some of that up, that we are absolutely being mindful that these are local dollars, they're coming out of local pockets, and that part of the thought process is to try and, in every case possible, put them back into a local pocket. So when you hear me say, do we have a local vendor, have we developed a relationship here at all? That's my thought process, is I've got somebody in the media sitting there and I want to make sure that he's picking up that we're trying to be responsible with the dollar.
Mike, I have a question. On these big projects, I'm looking at big projects and minor projects. On these big projects, it makes sense to me that you go to these other, the local vendors, they can get on that list, right? And I mean, all they have to do is get on the list, and then on these big projects, the contractor, if you have an architectural firm come in, I think in the past it's always been, if you can, get these local subcontractors to do it, because I know up at the high school they had a number of local subcontractors. So on the big projects, as far as time and all that, just seems to me that the co-op is the way to go. On maybe minor projects, it may be the other thing, but I just, if they have the opportunity to put their company into the list, which, I mean, it's right there, and then all of a sudden we need something done, I just can't understand why they wouldn't do that. What's the problem with that?
One of the things the board could do is when we talk to someone, a local contractor, and say, great, here's what you do. Get on the co-op. They do all the vetting. It'll be so easy for you in the end, and that's what you need to do. And I can see, a contractor from Phoenix not wanting local subcontractors because they're not vetted. He doesn't know anything about them. He's the contractor. He's responsible in the end, for what happens. I mean, he might want his own subcontractors to come up and do things, and he might not even bid someone very knowledgeable just because that's a requirement. He's going to have to do that. And I don't know. We want to keep it simple, and like Diana said, I don't want to add any more to the business office. I mean, this is a big job every time you are trying to find, issue an RFP or whatever. It's just something we don't want to add to the burden, and there it is. You got the Mojave Cooperative. Let's get our local people to get on there, and there they are. How simple that can be. I mean, I'm all for using them. But for example, architects, the number one thing is, is your background and experience and education for schools? Or do you build homes or commercial buildings or hospitals? Obviously, we don't want someone who gets the bid has no experience at all in schools. And that just the RFP alone, the way it's introduced, will specify that, and those people are not going to bid on it. And we can't help them on that because we're in the business of schools.
John brought up a good point, and I don't want you to misunderstand what I was saying, but John mentioned communication. And I think that, like I said, we have to turn it over to you to make these decisions. But we can make a huge difference in the community perception if when that is presented to the board, you tell them, we did this for this reason, and this reason, these local vendors applied, or no local vendors applied, and it's in the open. Because it's not so much what you have to do. You know what you have to do to make a good contract. It's making sure people understand why you did it is much more important.
I believe also equally important is how all of us communicate that as well, because we can add gasoline to a fire by one comment, and that doesn't help anyone. There's just things that we need to make sure that as we move forward with it, that you had a question just the last meeting during a work session regarding a sole source. I jotted down your questions. I picked up the phone. I got the answers to those questions. I presented them. You all had to give a yes/no vote to that, and that's just how I want to do things and how I've done things. Is that here's the evidence. Here are the facts, and then and then at that point it's off my plate because you as a board give those yes/no votes. But then at that point, It's how do we move forward from there? Because there will always be those who will say, it's the good old boy system, or I'm never, what's the use, and I'm never going to get picked anyways. And how we respond to that really does matter, because I believe, like I said, we could either extinguish the fire with facts, and here's the process, or we can add gasoline to it by even not responding at all, or saying, yeah, it's a tough process, that doesn't help. That doesn't help extinguish it. That just kind of creates that more uncertainty and more doubt. So, I appreciate all 5 of you, because in my opinion, all 5 of you ask good questions, and I appreciate that. I may not have every answer when you ask that question, but I believe I've established enough of a record to be able to prove to you that I am going to go find it. I'm not going to dismiss it, or at least try to find that answer for you.
You even got it record for doing that today in the newspaper, by the way.
I don't know what I'm saying.
I would rather than us say what you have to do, that we tell you, we'd like you to look at local vendors, and then you be prepared to explain it to us and to the community. Because that gives the communication, opens the communications to everyone. And then if we still have a question about something, we'll be glad to ask you. But I just don't like the idea of the board saying you must do this, or you must do this, or you must do this. Because each situation is different, each contract's different.
And that's not really and I agree with what you just said, and I appreciate your comments. And that's really not the reason of having this agenda item 3.2 here. It's just really to make sure we're all on the same page. I just want to make sure that what I'm providing you in my office, because Mary does a phenomenal job, what we're providing to you is what you need to make an informed decision. Because at the end of the day, they're still going to blame who they want to blame.
Sure.
But you're the ones that are responding with a yes, no, and I want you to be able to feel confident in why you said yes or no, and how you can articulate that and help us all moving forward. That's the momentum we need in this district. You mentioned, I believe, we have the talent pool.
We do.
Not just locally with our vendors, but we have it internally as well. So how do we move forward with that?
I'd like to hear from Hal.
Just
He's
a
had his
few
hand up
things.
for a while.
First, what Kathy said is spot on. When you select a general contractor, I've been involved in building 2 community bank buildings here in town. And being a banker, we had plenty of customers who were subs and suppliers. We made it very clear when a general contractor was selected, the general contractor selects the subs and suppliers. Now, certainly, we had talked to the general and said, if you could give consideration, we'd appreciate it to these over here, but ultimately, it's your decision as a general contractor, and I would explain that many, many, many times. I lost an account because he knew that his bid was less, and I explained and said, yeah, but the general has worked with this particular subcontractor for 20 years, and even though he's paying him $5,000 more, he knows that job's going to get done, and he doesn't have to oversee it. That's business. Okay, so that's, Kathy, spot on. The other question I had, and John and I generally attend the CRIBA, the Building Association meetings, and I know a lot of subs and suppliers in town. Under the current process, if I am a subcontractor and come up to the district and say, I would like to be considered for when you have something going out for bid, is it a pretty straightforward process now? Is it very involved? Is it not involved? Can you tell me that way?
What'll happen is if they come to the district office or request via email or phone call, whatever it may be, to be added to the bidders list, there's a form to fill out, 1-page form. When that's returned, we add them to that list under that area in which they are wanting to be under, electrician,
Sure.
or plumber, or whatever.
Sure.
And then at that point, when there's a need to procure a vendor within that field, then invitations or solicitations are sent out to respond to that particular project.
Okay, and the process itself, is it a couple hours to prepare this, the information to give? I mean, from the subcontractor standpoint, obviously there has to be some sort of a vetting process. So what they fill out, is that something an office manager, for example, would fill out their licensing and bonding and insurance and so on and so forth?
Correct.
It's pretty straightforward?
That's
Okay. And the other question was, does the school district work with the building association? Do they send that to the building association also when they're going out for bid?
The actual vendor, the vendor
Well, no,
list, or just the solicitation?
The request, right, the solicitation.
I'll have to look at that. I don't have that.
Because
for you.
the current head of the Builders Association, on a weekly basis, they send out to all of their members, and they have to be a member of the Building Association to receive it. But I would think that in the school district, any project involving construction like that, they would be one of the recipients of the solicitation, because they in turn are going to forward it out to their members. Because there's some members I've talked to that they'll see it, they'll drive down the street and see a project, and then find out after the fact, kind of like Al was saying. I mean, you can't. Everybody doesn't have to know everything. You can't get bogged down in that. But if there was something that could be put out there, especially the building association, and the school district say, hey, we sent the solicitation to the Builders Association. We can't go through the phone book and go through every single person. You just can't do that. But if they do that process of it, the application process is pretty straightforward and not real time consuming. I would encourage. I know plenty of subs and suppliers that I would encourage to say, hey, write it in there. And you can't live in the past. And the comment I hear, and John hears this too, is like, yeah, I did that before, and that's a bunch of crap, blah, 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 blah. I said, okay, that was yesterday. So try it again. And if it's the same dissatisfaction, we can address that. But let's move forward and encourage people to participate with the district.
I agree, Hal, and I wonder if we could find a way to go a step farther. I love your idea of sending that to the building association,
Yeah.
and then they distribute it to their members. But would it be possible to encourage people to join Mojave Cooperative by, say, once a month at the CRIBA meeting, for example? Someone, whether it's from Mojave Cooperative or someone from the school board, is trained in filling out that paperwork and the process to get into Mojave Cooperative, and they go there an hour before the CRIBA meeting, or they stay an hour after, and they know every month this is going to happen, and they know the school district is taking the initiative to do this, so that we're really serious about wanting to get this done, and we help them fill out whatever forms or paperwork they have to fill out until somebody...
Well, I know that I'm not familiar with the Mojave Cooperative and what it does, and I'm certain there's subs and suppliers out there the same way that they're not familiar with it.
Right.
So exactly that, if that information, what is the Mojave Cooperative?
Right.
Is that just something that everybody, you can join and then you get considerations?
Mojave Educational Services?
It's a state vetted contract, is it not?
Okay.
And that's a pretty intense process, isn't it? That's not, here, sign me up.
Correct. You can go and approach them to be on their bidders list.
Do you have
just
to
like
go
you
to
did
Kingman
here.
to do it?
I don't know.
But-
You
No, you
but
can do
that's-
everything online.
But that's statewide.
Okay, do it
And
online.
again,
Okay.
I could see the people that I know, I mean, I'm doing that, they'll say, well, I'm not really interested in bidding something in Kingman and Bullhead City, I want to stay local to Lake Havasu. So then, in that case, you wouldn't be interested in the cooperative, you'd be interested in the school district, saying, I just want you to, keep me in mind.
I reached out to a friend at NEC, so we'll see what he says. I want to know what their process looks like for signing.
I mean, if it's that simple, I'm willing to be trained in this process and to take my laptop over to this meeting and sit there and help someone just get started. You just get the ball rolling. Let's get this much.
But that's the other thing that I was trying to get at, and I have to always make sure that I hit the point, right? If, when a contract is let, not every time, but every now and then you explain, we went out for local bids, unfortunately there were no local bidders available, or no local companies put in a bid, right? Or, we were building this large project, we used the cooperative because of this, and this reason. Just informing the public will make somebody like Pat say, hey, my company could have done that, and he takes attention to it after that, right?
But Al, every school board meeting I've ever attended where the board had to vote on a contract, someone has always asked, did anyone local bid on this? It's always questioned, and then it's all explained. So communication is very important. But obviously, with the hostility out there, it's not a step. We need to go a step farther.
Well, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Is we may think we're communicating a lot of times when we're not.
I just want to say that in all the time that I've been attending the school board meetings, I've never heard anybody complain personally with their business about the process. And I'm not a business owner, but if I were, and I wanted to be involved with the district, I may be involved with the district. I don't need the district to reach out to me and hold my hand. If I'm an entrepreneur, I'm going to be coming to the school board meetings, watching the agenda, making sure I'm on the bidders list. So while I want to offer as much as we can to local people, I don't want to use any additional manpower that I feel like needs to be used in more important ways, because I feel like that's part of their responsibility as a business owner to run it down.
If it's not happening, and
Well,
then there's all. Then let's
right.
let's understand that this is the jungle, and
Sure.
they will be unhappy, and that's how it's going to be. But it's going to be one way or the other. We're either going to reach out and try to help solve this problem, or we're going to accept that it's always going to be that way.
My suggestion might be to do something pretty simple. We're in the electronic age and we're still passing out paper to do this. Is it possible for us to create a small point in our website, like a doing business with us section? And
In our new website.
And put the form up there, and then also a link off to the registration page for the Mojave Educational Cooperative.
That's a good idea.
John, just so you know, the bid form has been online
For
for
a
a really
long
long
time.
time.
Right,
Yeah.
but
And they can scan it, fax it, mail it.
And an explanation about how to get on the list.
But we could be easier to find, probably.
I think we should. And I've been communicating with a high school friend of mine, Mark DeBlasi, who works up at MEC, and he says, sure, link it in.
Yeah.
Make
So
it easy.
I've been talking to him.
And if I may share, it has been pretty well advertised in our community that we passed a bond.
Yeah.
And what the projects are. And I was approached, ran into a local contractor in AutoZone, and he said, how do I get on the bid list now that you guys are going to be doing all these big projects? We printed it out for him off of our website and handed it to him because he's a friend, you know. Some of our local vendors are now interested because it's a big project perhaps for them. But we have really quite a few local vendors that we use. In fact, we have to rotate them so that we're not showing preference to
Right.
them and opportunities. So it's not like, I don't know, and I don't mean to sound denigrating to the people who say, oh, it's such a process, because for some of them, if they were interested, as Mrs. Cohen said, you know, it's not that hard to find it or to ask somebody. It's not like we're not accessible. So,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
it's-
And to your point, Madam President, it's important that we realize that we can establish a time and a place to be made available to talk about that, but from my understanding, it's not appropriate for us to actually go out and solicit individuals to actually become signing them up for our bidders list, because then what that does is it creates the perception of selecting the haves and the have-nots, or
The friends,
establishing the
or-
friends versus
right.
the, I like
That's a
you,
good
but I
point.
can't get in contact with you.
Right.
So we have to be very careful with that. If, to your point, if they know where we are, if they have those questions, they need to ask them to the appropriate individual. They could always pick up the phone and call here just to ask the question, where do I go? Once they reach out to us, then at that point, we can
Help.
engage.
Right.
We can engage to whatever process is necessary to say, here, go to this part of the website, or I will send you the form. But going out to them and knocking on doors or saying, hey, here's this bidder's form, again, we have to be very careful with that.
To Al's point about communication and trying to kind of latch on to what John was talking about with the website, perhaps on that section of the website about how to do this, once a job has been completed to our satisfaction, we can mention it there with the local company that did it and keep an update of that.
I feel like we have that somewhere. I've read that. Maybe it was the thank you page. I don't, but it
We
was.
published something in the paper after the bus barn project was
Okay.
over, listing
That's right.
all
That's what it was.
of the
All
local
the vendors.
and
That's
thanking
right.
them for their.
We haven't done this in a couple of years, so, at this level.
I mean, maybe it's something that could be done. I mean, it's a way of communicating, and people go on and they say, oh, they do use local bidders. I'm just brainstorming here. I'm sure there are 5 more ways to communicate.
No, that's.
To answer
Well,
your
the
question.
proactive people are going to be proactive,
Right.
as Nicole said. And the negative people are always going to be negative,
That's right.
Right.
no matter what. It's just, I just like, I've got a clearer understanding of it. And I think, sending a solicitation through the Builders Association would be, I mean, it's just one more click of your button to send it off.
Well, and then you have a bunch of people that know that you're.
Exactly, exactly.
I think it's important to know too, when we're not going to go out for an RFP for whatever piece of whatever project, just the nuance of why. You know what I'm saying? That's just so helpful. It's a timing issue, or it's a qualification issue, or whatever it may be. I think we should be.
Well, that's what I was saying, is
Upfront about
if
that.
Mike came to the board meeting and said, we let these contracts, we did not go out for an RFP because, right? But the thing I want to make sure we're clear on is, if you come to us, Mike, and say, should I send an RFP out on that, we'll give you an answer. But that shouldn't be our purpose. That shouldn't be our purpose. Our purpose
So in
should
other
be to
words, be
tell you
careful
to
when
do
you
this.
ask.
No,
That's
you-
the purpose of 3.2 today, is we can have this discussion. Now I
But you
know where
understand what I'm
stand.
saying.
Yeah, no, I agree.
We shouldn't be telling you, you have to put out RFPs. No, that's not, it's your job, not
I
mine.
agree. That's why I just wanted to have this discussion to know that if we move forward in whichever process we select in the business office because of whatever is most advantageous to the district, that I know where you stand and you know where I'm coming from, so that as we start rolling along here, we're not having this conversation every month. It's just, this is, we're laying the ground rules now and
It
an
could change,
understanding.
rules change.
And when it comes
It's
to
always a moving
communication, I just want everybody to stop and think a second. If next week, the superintendent got with the newspaper and said, we had a large discussion about RFPs and local vendors and blah, 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 and it was very informative, that's communication.
Right.
Everybody knows we were addressing that. Putting it on the webpage is not communication.
No, but it's an outlet.
It's an outlet, but it's not communication. Because unless somebody actively goes and looks on the webpage and looks for that, they're not learning anything, they're not being communicated with.
But if I want to sign up a vendor and I say go to the website.
That's right. And
They
it's an
now have
outlet,
opportunity.
but you have to say, go to that website. The communication has to exist.
But on the same token, Al, if someone doesn't read the newspaper, they're not going to see it either.
Well-
I mean, you reach out to people, people
Right.
have to have their own responsibility to get that information. I get the 12-page newspaper now. I mean, I still subscribe to it for information. That's why I get it. And and there is information in there. But how many people either read the newspaper or go on electronically? How many school board meetings have I attended in the past where all of these people show up who are completely misinformed or uninformed or ignorant because they haven't take that step to call the business office and ask a question, or to call the superintendent's office to ask a question?
All I'm saying about the webpage is that, yes, they provide an outlet, just like he says, but they only provide an outlet for that contractor if somebody says to him, that form is on this page, right? Otherwise, he doesn't get the information. Whereas you're much more likely to get the information if you have it in a news source, in something that people read, even if his neighbor reads it, it's a source.
And I get that, and word of mouth is more effective than anything else. Unfortunately, misinformation travels faster than information.
That's true.
That's true.
Is the horse dead?
Just about. Okay. It's almost. But I appreciate the conversation and the dialogue. It's important.
Anything else? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
John Maston,
Yes.
Kathy Cox,
Yes.
Pat Rooney,
Yes.
Ellen Ward,
Yes.
Nicole Cohen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.